Oh, sugar. Now, part one was crazy, but this is part two. We want to welcome you to this part of the episode of How
to Fight Against Hate in America.
That's right. That's what we're doing in this episode. It's going to be powerful. A lot of what we're dealing with is history so that you have a context on how to fight because knowledge is power. And once you get that knowledge, you'll know that love is the answer that we need to apply to the enemy of hate, to our enemy hate. And it's going to be a mind-blowing session. So stick with us. If you haven't seen part one, I'd go back because we do have a giveaway in that episode. If you're just dialing in right now to part two and you've watched part one, welcome aboard. So excited that you're here. Hope you will like, comment, and subscribe amongst all the good things going on in this episode. And leave some comments that we can get engaged with. I think it'll be some fun.
Yeah. Enjoy part two.
Look at America through. Because it isn't, right?
Right.
There are some amazing things that have gone in to the mixing bowl of America. The Statue of Liberty, give me all your poor and your oppressed, right? That have turned out miraculous stories, right?
Yeah.
But when you begin to look at it through the lens of white supremacy, you understand, regardless of what party happens to be in charge, that there is a taint of our society that continue to write into law racist literature, racist legislation, propaganda that is very loud, very specific.
Yes.
That if it's not white, it's not right. And if it's not right, it's not America.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Well, interesting enough, white supremacist propaganda is literally running rampant through the United States right now. And when people think of white supremacists, they predominantly think of the KKK, right? That's usually where most people's minds go. Well, the KKK is kind of on the bottom of the scale of white supremacists right now because we have white nationalists who are out in force, and these are the people who are mixed into our politics. These are our politicians. These are our mayors, our law enforcement. They're literally spread through everything right now.
Now, you say the good old boys of the KKK, I'm never going to let them off the hook, right? Now,
never.
The reason I'm not going to let them off the hook is because they have always been the invasive group.
Yeah.
Okay? So when you say that they're not the biggest threat anymore, right? That rednecks missing their teeth and riding around on horses in the middle of the night, they're not our greatest threat. I would disagree with you. And the reason that I would say that is because the KKK's mindset has always been infiltration and then masking their white supremacy.
Very true.
And so it doesn't matter if they call themselves the Higgledy Boys or the Liggity Boys. Okay, I'm making up words there, and I know because I don't want to be, I don't want to just call out somebody to call them out. But it doesn't matter if they mask themselves as to me, a governor or a legislator, or if they call themselves a doctor or a lawyer. What they're doing is they're masking the intentions of their heart and the mindset that they function under in their conducting of daily lives. They can collect a paycheck from black people, smile at them while they pay them. But the whole mindset is, I'm still going to put on this mask.
Right.
And when I put on the mask, then I'm going to have the agenda of white supremacy at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with that. Now, according to the Anti-Defamation League, white supremacist propaganda has grown significantly over the last 5 years.
Tell it.
Now, in 2019, it had grown to 2,724 pieces of propaganda, and now in 2020, it almost doubled to 5,125. Now, to break this down even more of how this propaganda is getting out there, according to the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, between 2005 and 2010, 73% of people within white supremacist groups were radicalized by non-social media avenues, and 27% were from social media platforms.
Okay, this is prior to 2010.
Right. This was 2005 to 2010.
So church events, choir events.
They were more in-person group functions, group activities.
Gotcha.
Now, this all dramatically changed in 2011. So in 2011 to 2016, they literally swapped to 73% of radicalization was being done through social media.
It's crazy.
73%.
So again, we talk about social media being
Yeah.
a place where you could put on the hood.
Right.
Okay? What you're doing there is you're hiding your true identity, right?
Yeah.
You start talking about kids and moral values, and you start talking about how wonderful America is, and never
Yeah.
forget. But let's not talk about race,
Yeah.
right? Racism is evil, and they start defining racism by something it was never intended to be defined by.
Right.
Where they begin to say, okay, if I, as a person of color, begin to talk about race as a real topic of issue, then I'm the racist,
Yes.
right? And so they begin reverse psychology on the topic of racism, and so now
They
you have
absolutely
a
did.
president who says, you know what, if I ever run, I'm going to run as a Republican because they're the most uneducated, they're the most ill-prepared for the deception that I'm going to bring their way, basically, right? And so I'm not saying that all Republicans are uneducated,
Of course,
but they're extremely naive and gullible to the idea of the great red, blue, and white, red, white, and blue. I don't know what our slogan is, right? The good red, white, and blue, right? So they eat that stuff up like it's corn from Nebraska, but they don't understand that there's an evil side to some people's agenda where they want to feed this very patriotic, card-carrying, it's all about America, don't you hate them sons of bitches taking a knee during the NFL football game. They're protesting everything that's American, not understanding that they're actually standing against everything that is American, right? In the stance of white supremacy that's gone rampant, and police brutality that has come as a result of it. And so now we have this old covert operation where we used to say it'd be better if the world was overt than covert. That was our message in the 1990s with Race Relations 2000. We were hoping for a world in 2000 that there would no longer be overt racism, right? We're far from that.
Right.
And certainly in a world where we would begin to recognize when people were using covert racism as a mindset for American diplomacy, as a mindset for American policy, legislation, and yet we find ourselves here 2021 and covert racism is not only real, but it's extremely real in the make-believe world of social media and the internet.
Now, and you know what, I would go even a step further and ask the question, have they really just been deceived? Or is this their true heart finally coming out to where they feel comfortable enough now to express this out in the open? And to say, I'm not afraid anymore to openly be this. I mean, we had a president that, was openly
so powerful,
doing a lot of evil things. And so we saw a huge rise in the Republican Party of them following in his footsteps. So again, my question is it ignorance, or are they saying now, hey, we're free to be open about how we feel?
We have no fear of it.
We have no fear. There's no repercussions. Sure. And, we're going to control this country. We're going to continue to control this country so we can do what we want.
And again, I continue to hope in the good of man.
Right.
A lot of the people who I've heard, though, and I think we'll share some of this a little bit later, who comment even on my social media pages, are come from perspectives that are the most racist nonsense I've ever heard in my life, some of them, right? And so you start to begin to wonder, wait, well, I've broken bread at your house, I've eaten dinner at your home. We've attended church together, we've gone to sporting events together, we've sat on, I haven't never really participated, but PTA events together, whatever it might be. And yet here I am looking at you wondering, is this really the true foundation of what you believe? And I just happen, in my uniqueness, that I just happen to be the good Negro that you knew. And I'm not comfortable being that. And once I find that out, you're not going to be comfortable treating me like that. Right? Because we've got to see this world as equal from a very similar perspective.
Well, earlier you kind of touched a little bit on Trump, right, and things that he said. And I want to come back to this now because it's very important to digest this. We heard so many rumors, right? We heard all this nonsense from people, how Trump was giving secret messages, right, to his followers, to the Proud Boys, to all these people. And we're just like, oh my gosh, these people are crazy. All these conspiracy people. Well, come to find out, they weren't actually crazy. And Trump was actually giving messages to white supremacist groups. Now, I know you're going to say, well, you can't prove that, right? How do you know that? Well, I want you guys to really think about this for a second. And please, by all means, if you want to go back and search all of Trump's speeches, his rallies, everything he said, and listen to the words that come out of his mouth, his rhetoric, you will see that they are white supremacist ideologies. He actually took direct phrases and quotes related to white nationalist groups' mandates. He took neo-Nazi quotes. He actually quoted stuff from Hitler, from Nazis in Germany.
Right.
He takes these to create fear and hate against people who are not white.
Right.
So it's very important. Words, as I say, words can speak life into something. They can speak death into something. And words are powerful. And words need to be really, really carefully thought out and spoken. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples that we can break down to help you kind of see this, because I didn't ever think about this, to be honest. When I listened to Trump's speeches, I hated every second of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this man is just so full of hate.
Sure.
But I didn't really listen to the words he was saying. So I'm going to give you actually...
And this is just a moment. I'd like if you would. I mean, I know that some of you think it's BS. Some of you are right in line with what we're talking about. Please comment in the section below your feelings and your ideas and thoughts about it. But I do believe that now is the time, and I know we begin to address that a little bit later. And so there's going to be a 2-part series to this, and we'll probably tap into this a little bit more in part 2. But it's really important for us, people of color, and our white brothers and sisters. There is no division of hate between us. If you are a person of light skin, white, with a Caucasian, whatever it is, and you stand against racism, my heart is towards you, and our hearts are one and the same. There's no division of skin tone based on that, right?
Yeah.
But I love the statement, and the truth of the reality is this: where the power is where the people is where the people are. Where the people are is where the power is. And so we need the people to come together and stand against racism. And I know that there's going to be a debate and a dialogue, and we just had a wonderful dialogue about this topic with someone on my Facebook who really has gone this way. My mom, for instance, being Caucasian, me being mixed, a lot of the years I remember this whole mindset, this whole belief system of talking about skin tone as though we were colorblind, right? As though skin color didn't exist to her or didn't exist to me. But the danger in that is we lose so much value in the human person. And so we're going to touch on more of that, but it's important for us right now in this moment to begin to comment, hey, all of us together. I love the statement, all lives matter, right? But I only love the statement, all lives matter, if you're able to say in the context, Asian lives matter, and Black lives matter, and brown lives matter. If you can't say brown lives matter, if you can't say Asian lives matter, if you can't say Black lives matter, then you can't say all lives matter.
Right.
And you can't say it with a conviction. But once you begin to be able to say that all lives matter, and you begin to break them down individually, that's when we can stand as a family of people, of humanity, and begin to say, you know what, all lives matter. And I believe police lives matter, even though that's a profession, not just it's not a race, obviously, or a national background. But it's time that all lives matter because we stand individually for each one. All right. Break it on down, girl.
And I want to be clear that we don't hate Republicans. We used to be Republicans. We don't hate Trump. But I know it seems to some people that maybe we're attacking them, right? But we are using them as examples to get people to understand what is happening in this country, to understand the mindsets of people who are leading this country, people who are in powerful positions. So it's important to break this down so you can see what is really going on in front of you.
You know, one of my favorite presidents, and I wouldn't say he's definitely not one of the best presidents of the modern era, right? But one of my favorite presidents was Bush Jr., okay? They said he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. He wasn't. They used to knock him all the time. He wasn't the brightest bulb in the set, right? That there was definitely a dullness to him, but there was a humanity to him, right? There was an approach to humanity that said he loved people. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't ever know. And whether it's true or not, Trump is even aware of the language that's in his speech. He does have speechwriters. Most people do, right? And he didn't use his speechwriters quite like an Obama does or like a Biden does, right? Where there's a teleprompter.
Right, yes.
And I know a lot of times he would make fun of people who read their speeches off teleprompters. He wanted to have this shoot from the hip deal. But there's no doubt that he had speechwriters who would write these things into his speeches, right? And so whether it's all him or whether it's a collective of those that were around him, the things that he said incited white supremacy.
Yes.
And those who heard him agreed with him if they were white supremacists.
Right.
Okay?
So I want to talk about Trump on the Mexicans crossing the border. This is a big one because I want to kind of break down some of the words that he used and why he used them.
And the progression of the way he used them.
And the progression, yes. So this is a direct quote from Donald Trump. He said, "When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with them. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists."
Donald Trump.
Now, I remember when he said this, and I remember a lot of people just roaring in agreement. Yes, you're right. All these criminals are crossing our borders.
Which is not statistically true.
Which is not. But I want to break down a few words that he uses and a few phrases because I really want you to see the effect that these words have. They're not sending their best. They're not sending you. So he is very clearly creating a division between white America and Mexicans.
Yes.
He's saying they're not you because you are better than them.
Tell it.
I mean, think about those words. They're not sending you because you are better than them. And you might think that that's no big deal, but think about what that invokes in the human psyche. Hearing that they're not sending people like us because we're the good people, right? We're the good ones. And so they're not sending us. They're sending bad people. So he's installing white supremacy in the minds of people listening to him, in addition to invoking fear of Mexican people. He's saying they're sending their very worst. They're criminals. They're rapists.
It goes beyond that. Not only is he saying they're sending those types of people, it's a progression. They're coming with problems, as though people in America don't have problems.
Right, as if we don't have those issues too.
As though we don't have the coronavirus.
Right.
As though we don't have poverty. As though we don't have sickness.
As if we don't have drug issues.
Massive drug issues, right? As though right now they call it a mental health issue, right? And I don't disagree with the terminology of mental health issue, but it only became a mental health issue when it became an issue for white America, right? Before that, it was a drug abuse issue, right? And so when you break down the progression of that sentence, it says they have lots of problems. There's a truth to that, right? And so his crowd begins to roar and rip and scream because there's a degree of truth.
Right.
And they're bringing those problems with them, right? In most cases, right, when we talk about other immigrants coming to our country, we talk about them leaving their problems to come to a better life.
They're not going to come to this country, especially if they're coming illegally into this country. They're escaping where they're from because it's really horrible.
Sure.
They're coming here to have a better life. They're not going to jeopardize that by committing crimes and all these horrific things that Trump wanted to make people believe. I mean, that made absolutely no logical sense. And especially, most of the people crossing the border were children.
Sure. And they're bringing their drugs. They're bringing their crime.
Yep.
You have to understand something. They're bringing it with them, their drugs. They're bringing their crimes.
Right.
Wait a minute. I thought that was the job of the CIA in the 1990s, right? That's what they did. They crossed the border with drugs.
Yeah.
They infiltrated our communities. And if you call me a conspiracy theorist guy, go look it up, research it. The documents are being released as we speak. Now it goes from they're bringing with to they are.
Yes.
Now that is from an activity to an identity.
Right.
And so what he attempts to do is he begins to establish the white supremacy identity to their rapists. Now, it's not a clear definition in the audience's mind when he says they're a rapist. Are they raping our girls only? Are they raping our men? Are they raping our nation? They're just takers, right?
Well, and if you're asking yourself, okay, well, what does this really do? I'll tell you what the effects of a statement like this are. It means maybe not today, but maybe a week from now,
so good,
you're going to run into a Mexican person and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, they're a criminal. You're going to have a subconscious reaction to what has been planted in your brain, and you are now going to fulfill the lies and narratives and stereotypes that your president just told you existed in these people, and it won't matter to you whether they're Americans or whether they're straight across the border, because you're not going to know the difference.
It's the mindset of clutching the purse.
Yes.
Right? It's kind of like this when I love the joke where you step on the elevator and you see a black person get on. All of a sudden, Tiffany, you like that, right? All of a sudden, Tiffany grabs her purse and clutches it like she's lost her mind. Now, there's nothing that's going to stop a person my size from grabbing that little purse from you, right?
Right.
But it's based on ideologies and thoughts that were introduced into your subconscious from the time you were little, from the time you were exposed to what is black, what is people of color. That idea in your mind was they're going to snatch my purse up. When the truth is when I see a group of white men walking towards me on the street, I'm the one that should actually be afraid. They're stealing my pension. They're stealing my retirement. They're stealing my freedom, right? Now, that's a joke. I can't remember who the artist that actually wrote it is. But it's so absolutely true, is that the greatest danger to America is white supremacists who are taking from people of color their value. Now, we don't have time in this, and maybe we can go into another video, which would be extremely valuable, but all the contributions that Mexican Americans have brought to our country, all the different contributions people from South America have brought to our country, all the inventions, all the great literature, all the poetry, all the music, all the dance, all the forms of art that they've brought to our country, all the forms of healing that they've brought to our country. It's amazing today. You find very rich, wealthy, well-to-do people who send their cancer victims to Mexico for treatment. So you have to understand yourself. They are not just sending their worst. They have sent time and time again their very best, and we have failed them because we have held them back with this mindset that they are. By whatever definition that we have foolishly given them.
Now, here's another statement by Trump. He was at a rally in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he was talking about his border wall. And he says, national emergency it is. And if you look at the border and you look at the hundreds of thousands of people who are invading, or at least trying to invade our country, you know that we needed and are building it.
Invading.
Yeah. So again, let's talk about words.
Invading.
Now, invading or to invade means to conquer or plunder. So now he has subconsciously given you a word to make you think they are coming into our country by the hundreds of thousands,
like
which
pirates.
Isn't true, but that this mass army is coming into our country to conquer and plunder America. See, again, it's about the words that are used to instill fear and hate in people who are different from us. There's so many words he could have used, but he specifically used the word invading.
And many of these immigrants are not just Mexicans,
right?
Or Mexican Americans trying to become Americans, but they're people from South America, Central America, that are not. They're coming here as refugees. Right.
Yes, and there is a huge difference.
And there is a major difference, right? And maybe we don't have time to get into that now, but I do know that many of the same people barking to keep them out, to keep the invaders out, are the same people that read the same Bible that I do that says, do not turn away the refugee.
Yes.
Do not turn away the immigrant. Do not turn away the hungry.
Yes.
Or the desolate, right? And so the hypocrisy is mind-blowing.
And Trump and the Republicans really worked very hard to group immigrants and refugees into the same exclusive group so that Americans would not see them differently. And linking crime to immigration has been a long-standing tactics of Republicans. They use fear and crime of immigrations to make people afraid of anybody coming into this country. Now, here's another really great example, because this one, when I read this, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. In 2018, Florida Republican Representative Matt Gaetz told parents of children killed at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, which was tragic.
It is tragic.
Excuse me, that they were wrong to advocate for the HRH, which is a bill that would have mandated background checks for gun purchases. Now, he went on to say, and I quote, "I hope we don't forget the pain and anguish and sense of loss felt by those all over the country who have been victims of violence at the hands of illegal aliens." H.R. 8 would not have stopped the circumstances I raised, but a wall, a barrier on the southern border may have, and that is what we are fighting for.
So I didn't realize that shooter was an immigrant.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the shooter of that tragic event was a Florida born and raised 19-year-old kid who went to that high school, who had a lot of, unfortunately, some mental health issues that tragically led him to shooting up the school. There was no immigration involvement whatsoever with the shooting. None at all.
They weren't from Mexico.
No. Now people...
Central Costa Rica.
Right. Yeah. I had to actually look this story up because...
Brazil.
No. He was an American citizen, born and raised. No, I had to look this up because I thought, oh, did an illegal immigrant shoot kids at this school? Because that's basically what Matt Gaetz is saying, that, you know, this could have been prevented if we had built a wall. If we had kept these immigrants out, this could have been prevented. That restricting gun laws is not the answer. Getting rid of the immigrants is the answer. And when I found out that the shooter had absolutely nothing to do with immigration, I was just disgusted. Again, think of the words. He is telling grieving families who have just lost their children that this could have been prevented, essentially, if they had built a wall. I mean, again, so now you've got people who maybe don't know the full story. You've got people on news stations, on radios, listening to this statement by this representative, telling them that it's immigrants' fault. We got to keep the immigrants out because they're responsible for these crimes, for these murders, when they had nothing to do with it. But again, it gets in the psyche, it gets in the brain, and people remember down the road these words that are being spoken to them, and they're being told, hey, wait a minute, all this crime, this problems happening in our community could be all prevented if we keep immigrants out of this country.
It's heartbreaking.
But that is simply not the truth. Again, this is to continue enforcing the white supremacy ideologies that this country was founded on. We don't want people who are not white coming into this country. And if they do, we have to criminalize them. We have to make American citizens fear them and be afraid enough to invest in building a wall, to keep them out, to keep these criminals out of these countries. They have to cause fear, telling them they're taking your jobs. Okay, let's be real. Most of these people coming in this country take jobs that no American would ever do in a million years. And they do it and they work their asses off to support their families. Now, I don't disagree that there is a right way to do it, but do you know how difficult we make it for immigrants to become citizens in this country? It is not some easy process. Republicans get up there and they get on their high horses and they tell you, well, they just need to do it the legal way. That's all, that's fine. But they don't make it easy for them at all to do it the legal way. Not only is it incredibly expensive, but most of them can't speak English and they're not given help and the opportunities to be able to understand the process. So if we genuinely cared about them coming in the legal way, we would offer help for them to be able to do that.
Training, education.
Absolutely.
Equipping. Yeah.
Absolutely. But instead, they have taken the fear tactic. They want to install fear in the American people. Loss of income, loss of jobs, crimes happening, shooting sprees. All these things are all the immigrants' fault when it's not.
You know, there's a saying, don't itch if you ain't got a scratch. Don't dance if you don't like the music.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, so I have some stats.
Stats on hate crimes.
Stats on hate crimes in this country, because I think
they say break it down to the science, right?
Yes.
Let the numbers tell the truth.
Yes, let them tell the story. So this comes from the FBI database, which you can look up yourself, and I encourage you to do that. In 2019, Black people made up almost 50% of hate crime victims, totaling 2,391 reported incidences.
Tell it.
So almost 50% were all Black people. Now,
but they make up, hold on a second, 13% of our society.
Of population?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But 50% of the crimes were.
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to get the numbers straight.
Now, of the almost 5,000 hate crimes reported in 2019, they showed, in addition to the almost 50% Black victims, 15.7% were white victims. Hispanics were at 14.1% and Asians were at 4.4%. Now, I do want to point out that in 2020, following Trump calling the coronavirus the China virus or the Kung flu, Asian hate crimes surged to over 150%.
Are you telling us that perhaps the president's words had weight?
Yeah,
Good.
I think so. Now, most of these crimes included intimidation, various degrees of assault, and destruction of property. Now, it's important to note this because this comes, again, from the FBI and Homeland Security database, and we have had many discussions with people who refuse to acknowledge this is true. But in 2020, white supremacist and white nationalist groups were responsible for 53% of all extremist-related fatalities and violence in 2020. Now, these are things such as Black Lives Matter riots and protests and things like that. All the stuff that we have dealt with, people saying that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization, Antifa is a terrorist organization, they caused all this violence. People, 53% of all the violence you saw last summer were from white supremacist and white nationalist groups.
It's a nightmare.
I mean, this isn't my opinion. These are facts from the FBI and Homeland Security databases. Now, this was shocking to me. But in 2020, there was reported 838 active hate groups in the United States of America.
Hate groups, organizations,
Hate
recruiting,
groups,
seeking
organizations.
membership. Wow.
838 active in 2020. So when people say that it's not a big deal, white supremacy isn't an issue in this country, and that those of us speaking out against it are the ones that are creating all the hate, the violence, we're the racists in this country. Take that in for a moment. 838 groups that have been designated as hate groups by the U.S. government. So I'm going to read you a couple stats, actual reports, because I think I really want this to sink in. Now, this is the top 10 right extremist hate groups. So again, so many things have been considered that the Republicans are friends of people of color. But most of these hate groups are all right extremist groups that believe in the foundations of Republicans and their beliefs. So there are 333 general white hate groups. There is 128 white nationalist groups. There is 72 anti-Muslim groups, 65 anti-LGBTQ groups, 63 neo-Nazi groups, 36 racist skinhead groups, 31 neo-Confederate, 25 KKKs, and 19 anti-immigrant hate groups.
It's crazy.
I mean, it's insane.
Who got that kind of time in their life to hate that much? They got to be a part of a hate group.
Right. They said that in 2020 alone, they saw the biggest surge of people joining these groups, which is pretty crazy. Now, the next one I want to read is the number of hate groups by state. And I'm going to read these all because I think it's very important for everybody, because I know our viewers are from all over, to know what is going on in your own state.
And to fight against it.
Yes, because being aware is part of the issue. People are just not aware of what is going on around them.
So true.
So this surprised me until Richard kind of talked about it, and then it actually made sense to me. But the state with the highest number of hate groups was California. And they have 72 hate groups. Florida came in second with 68 hate groups. Texas had 54. New York has 37. Pennsylvania has 36 hate groups. Tennessee has 34. Virginia has 33. Georgia has 29, along with North Carolina. Arizona has 26. Michigan has 25. Washington State has 22. Ohio has 21. South Carolina and Alabama both have 20 hate groups. Missouri, Indiana, District of Columbia, and Illinois both have 19. They all have 19 hate groups. Colorado has 17. Louisiana and New Jersey both have 16. Maryland has 15. Arkansas has 14. Wisconsin and Kentucky have 13. Oklahoma, Massachusetts, and Nevada all have 12 hate groups. Minnesota and Oregon have 11. Mississippi and Nebraska have 9. Idaho has 7. Montana, New Hampshire, Connecticut all have 6. West Virginia, Utah, and Hawaii all have 4. Maine, Iowa, and Delaware all have 3. Rhode Island and Kansas has 2. Alaska, Wyoming, New Mexico, South Dakota, Vermont, and North Dakota all have 1 hate group.
So much hate in this world.
That's a lot of hate.
It's heartbreaking.
I mean, it's astounding to me how many groups are in everybody's state, and most people don't even think that they exist, really. When people think of white nationalist group or hate groups or KKK, they see what the media shows, these couple select groups, right? Mm-hmm. You know, Proud Boys, Boogaloo Boys, all these people. So they think of just them, oh, they're not in my state.
Right.
You know, they're just 1 or 2 groups. No, 838 groups. And each of these groups have thousands of people who are members of these groups. And
actively recruiting.
Actively recruiting.
Online, in real person. In your schools.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think it's so important to understand this and understand that this comes from a history and a foundation of white supremacy in this country. And look, I know it is an ugly word and people don't want to listen to it and they don't want to acknowledge that this is our history, but it is the truth. And this is why we are where we are today, because the people are unwilling to acknowledge the fact that this is a white supremacist society.
So good.
Now, I'm not saying you're a white supremacist because you live in this society, but the reality is people who are out there saying, hey, I'm not racist, because they all sound racist, the chances are most of them really are racist because they are indoctrinated and raised in a racist society built on white supremacy.
And many of them may not even be aware or conscious of it as being an issue. Right?
Absolutely.
And I know you're going to touch base on this about many people don't even recognize that they even think about race.
Yeah.
Ever to the perspective. And a lot of times people will ask me, Richard, you have so many things that you could fight against, right? And I fight against injustice anywhere. I think that the greatest quote ever is probably this: a threat against justice anywhere is a threat against justice everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should go sticking our nose into everybody's business and trying to investigate what their form of justice is and how fair it is, and is it truly equal in your group or your society or your country, right? How dare you do this to women in your country? And I think that there's a degree of that we need to rise up. And they say, Richard, there's many causes. How about human trafficking? Why don't you get involved in that? And I have, and I fight that fight, and I think it's an absolutely detestable reality. However, when you begin to listen to even these people in hate in these groups, they begin to obviously start to begin to picture black gangs running around our country, snatching up white little girls from malls. And I begin to wonder, how did you cognitively form this in your mindset when we know that the majority of prostitution at the highest levels happen through the Caucasian world? Just study it.
It's true.
But we always have this bias in our minds. So fundamentally what I'm saying is, if we can fight white supremacy in our country, we make a dent in so many other avenues. Illegal drugs. We begin to tap into illegal gun use. We begin to tap into human trafficking. Obviously, so many ills of our society we begin to tap into when we begin to address white supremacy as the governing rule of our land, right? Yeah.
Well, in the video that Richard kind of talked about earlier, it's called Whitewashed: Unmasking the World of Whiteness. And we're going to put the link to this video in our description because I think it's a very valuable video. I came across this video the other day and I was amazed. And it basically is a documentary where somebody who went around and spoke specifically to Caucasian people about being white in America. And it was pretty incredible, some of their thoughts and the things they had to say. I thought some of them were very eye-opening. And I know, being a white person, sometimes it's easier to listen to another white person tell you about the things that you're afraid to talk about.
You're saying I just step out the viewpoint. I ain't mad at you.
I'm just
saying.
have
the conversation there.
It's a great video, different opinions and thoughts on it, but I think it's really prevalent to where we are today in a society. And it talked a lot about, too, as you mentioned, immigrants coming here who were light-skinned and how they had to assimilate themselves into white supremacy culture, and they essentially had to get rid of their heritage and their culture to be able to be considered white. They were not allowed to bring that with them because that was not what was white and acceptable. And they had to change who they were and adapt to the white supremacist culture here in America so they would not be treated like people of color were treated. So I highly recommend you take on that video, give it a view. I think maybe you might learn something, or might really kind of make you think a little bit of something from a different perspective. Because, that's really what we want to do, is we want to give you different perspectives. But, I know that was a lot to digest there, but I think it's important.
That's a full meal deal right there.
But it's so important to understand behaviors and patterns. And while we don't want to talk about it because it makes us uncomfortable, we have to, as a whole society, recognize the fact that this is a white supremacist society.
There was a game I played as a kid, and it was called Frogger.
Frogger.
Yep, and there were vehicles going this way and this way on the board, and you had to navigate across it, and it was very uncomfortable. But getting to the other side was the only way that you survived.
Yeah.
Sometimes you had to jump from log to log and so forth, but it was navigating against the flow of traffic, right? And it's uncomfortable. But the only way that we survive as a society is by getting outside of our comfort zone and dialoguing about things that are uncomfortable to talk about.
And then you ask yourself, okay, where does all this hate leave us, right? Where does all these hundreds of years of indoctrination of white supremacy and division and fear and where does this lead us to? Well, this leads us to a 21-year-old white man shooting up Asian parlors in Atlanta. And, the death of
and
8
even more
people.
frightening than that, I want you to give this. That was powerful.
Yeah, for sure.
Part 2 will shake your brains loose if you're not careful.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going in there.
Yeah, and I encourage you, go back through, write down some notes.
Yeah.
Write down some things that you have some talking points. Don't be bashful in leaving comments or leaving questions or even emailing us in those regards, because we want to be engaged. We want a person engage us the other week about voter suppression, and we had
Great
a lengthy response to that, and they seem to really honor that and value that, and that's what we want to do for you. We certainly don't pretend to have all the answers, but what we do have, and we believe we want to share with you, so you can reflect back with us and maybe even have a little healthy debate if there's some changes to be made. But part 2 was powerful. I want to thank you for all the research you did, poured your time into it, and I hope it'll benefit you. Again, I'm Richard Thomas.
I'm Tiffany Thomas.
And this is the Lionheart Institute podcast on how to deal with hate in America. God bless you.
Join us for part 3.
It's going to be so good. So good.